we're off.
Yeah. Another friend who was a father. His initial reaction was hostility. He said, what are you going on about? We're all dealt cards that we don't like. We just have to put up with it. And you should just get on with it. Kevin is a lovely guy, and we've been friends for a long time. But we carried on talking about it. And after about the fifth session with several bottles of red wine involved, he suddenly said, I get it. I know what you're going on about. And it was almost like a sort of eureka moment. There was a click. He'd been working at it because he cares, and we'd worked through it together. And he said, "I'm just lucky to have been a parent and to have 3 children, but it might not have happened just if something had been different physically or something." So it was a good outcome. From initial misunderstanding to trying to understand each other's position.
Welcome to the Full Stop Podcast, a podcast for the childless not by choice, their cheerleaders and their allies. Now, the Full Stop Podcast is hosted by Sarah Lawrence, Berenice Howard-Smith and me, Michael Hughes. We explore themes that make up the childless identity, and we hope that with all our special guests, you'll find inspiration, information, and if appropriate, your space in the childless community. Now, please remember that the thoughts expressed by our guests are theirs alone and not necessarily those of the podcast hosts. This episode, we are joined by our great friend, journalist, author, and as you will hear, budding playwright, Robert Nurden, who you may remember we interviewed last year in celebration of his book, I Always Wanted to Be a Dad, Men Without Children. This month, we are talking about the complexities of friendship and how we have fostered connections with those outside of our community, how we have come to terms with letting some of those friendships go, and what we have all learned along the way.
Welcome, Robert Nurden, to the Full Stop Podcast. It's your second?
Yes, it's my second. Yeah, my second honour. Yeah, thank you very much for asking me. It's nice to see you all again.
And you too.
It's good to see you.
Yeah. So today we're talking about friendship and how friendship alters because of childlessness. And the reason that we wanted to catch up with you, Robert, was because of conversations that I had, and I know it's been something I think you've spoken to Michael about as well, and probably to Sarah in passing too, about reactions to the publication of I Always Wanted to Be a Dad, Men Without Children. And some of that resonated with me, and I think it would resonate with a lot with our listeners as well, about sometimes how sharing our stories, however that might be in a conversation, or whether it's something bigger, publishing a book or even a podcast, being on a podcast or standing on a stage. I'm thinking about events like Storyhouse or having a blog, in whatever form that might be, that can really alter how people relate to us and how friendship can change because of it. And I wondered if that was something that we could explore today with you.
Very interesting. It's not touched on very much within the childless community as other issues, but it is quite important, I think.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Do you come across this in your work, Sarah, as well, in terms of isolation? I know we've talked a lot on the podcast before about loneliness, and of course friendship is a big part of that, isn't it? Those feelings.
Oh yeah, completely. I mean, I've experienced it personally, but I often get clients talk about it. So they can be surrounded by people, friends, family, but there's a real sense of isolation and disconnectedness in terms of almost like life has gone on hold and people have gone off doing what they're doing, having families, etc. And then your life is kind of in stasis while you try and get your head around the fact that you're not going to have a family. So sometimes it's not about the friends cutting you off. It's about not being able to connect with them on a level that you were before when you thought you were going to be a parent like them. So it's kind of multifaceted, I think, when I look at it, when I talk about it.
Because Michael, you've mentioned about banter, when banter become bullying. I know we've had that conversation before. that again, I think that's friendship, isn't it? It can be, this is kind of a bit of a kind of like a teasing thing, and then it can very quickly become bullying.
Yeah, I was thinking about this the other day. My neighbourhood is a very good example of this, where when we first moved here, when that was about 99, 2000, I think, other people in the street were relatively our age. There was probably 3 or 4 couples that were around our age, and they started to have children. Previous to this, Sunday afternoon would be drinks on someone's driveway, and then we'd all congregate across the road, have a few drinks on a Sunday, and then off we'd go for our, Sunday evening. And that went on for quite a while, but then as everyone started to have children, it became difficult. As Sarah said, things changed, and they didn't know how to deal with us, and we didn't know how. Well, I guess what we did, we were just trying to, survive the grief, and that drew us apart. And one of the things that I was thinking about the other day was that there was a time where particularly the blokes on the driveway would be giving it to me. Come on, Michael, what are you doing? Get over here, Hughesy, And I obviously didn't want to go because it was difficult because of the way that some of the other neighbours were beginning to treat us. And, yeah, that almost felt like, no, I don't say bullying, but it almost felt like that. Belittling me, why weren't we over there having drinks on a Sunday afternoon? At no point did people think, why?
Yeah.
And that's what drives me a lot around that, because we also need to not get in that zone where we're bashing people with kids, because like you've said, Berenice, in the past, having kids changes you, but not having kids changes you. And for some, the paths will never.
Yeah, that reminds me very much, Robert, of what you've been talking about. I think in conversations we've had about working in certain environments as well. I'm thinking when it's quite up close and you've got to deal with it a lot, like your driveway, it's your home, Michael, but also I think in workplaces as well. And Robert, you've talked about that, I think in the book, but also I think when we've had conversations, again, we've spoken so often, I forget where we've had these conversations about in workplaces and quite aggressive workplaces. And I've had experience of working in similar situations to you in that kind of high pressure environment, and it's quite unforgiving, isn't it, I think, as well. And trying to create friendships in that kind of circle, but also dealing with those boundaries is quite hard too.
Well, yes, coming from the world of journalism, this kind of banter, so-called wit, is sort of is hyped up even more because newspaper offices can be quite brutal places. People pride themselves, men and women, pride themselves on their fast wit, and you have to be on your game. It can be quite, you had to be on your guard and be aware of how to handle it. But on the other hand, I've been lucky enough for the newspapers I did work in were slightly, they weren't the Daily Mails or the Suns or the Star. I was on the broadsheet papers, so it was slightly gentler and more liberal. So I don't think I had a particularly bad time. And also when it identified as a childless man quite late in my life, so as a sort of in my early 60s. So I was quite a senior member of staff then, and it didn't become an issue. And on the book wasn't out until like 3 or 4 years ago. So it might be more productive to talk about what the impact of the book was on just people I knew, not necessarily in the workplace, if I may. And as Sarah's already pointed out, it's highly complex and nuanced, just like every other area of childlessness. So many facets to it. So I got amazing support for the book from 95%, 99% of the childless community. Of course, most of those people who have articulated that are women, and my reviewers were largely women. But the reaction of men having read the book or tried to read it was much more varied and at both extremes. So there was some anger from people, from older men, grandfathers, parents. Once someone said, I don't like being shouted at by other men. My book starts in quite a raw and brutal way. Not brutal, but raw and honest way. And he couldn't get past the first couple of chapters. And And I've still, in the 3 years since then, I've been wondering what's going on with that. And I have a few ideas, but I'm not completely sure what the psychology. I'm not a psychologist, so what the psychology is in that scenario, I'm not sure. But I think, loss of friendship sounds quite dramatic, like a falling out. But in my experience, most of the episodes have been just a cooling off. Just, I prefer to be with this person than that person as I was in before. So you make a choice about where you prefer to be. This has been the more common thing, and I suppose that is loss of friendship, but it's a lessening of friendship, which has happened quite a lot. And suddenly, by bringing that book out and writing quite honestly, people have been shocked by, I never saw Robert in that light before. I didn't know this was his preoccupation. Quite late in their lives, probably they kind of had to make an adjustment, which they kind of resent having to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, completely. I'm surprised, shocked maybe, that somebody felt your book was shouting. I mean, I've read those, particularly remember that first chapter, and it was just raw. I didn't get the sense you were shouting anything. You were sharing how raw your feelings were. That's a really strange response for me. I mean, sitting on this side of the fence, obviously, but that must have really taken you back to think that somebody took what you were saying as shouting.
It was also because somebody I was quite close to. That was within the family rather than friendship. Yes, and of course, just at the time when it happened, you deal with it. But the knock-on effect of that is I won't be in a hurry to get in touch with that guy again. That's how it works.
I think it's an interesting thing, isn't it? The preference of being with people. Because I go back to when I was in my 20s, and I'm thinking of listeners who might be in a similar situation where they are facing perhaps people they've got a lot of things in common with, and there's life goals. Point, I think, when perhaps another person around them, someone in their close friendship circle, has children, or their life situation changes in a different way, that can be quite devastating. And that as we get older, perhaps it's more kind of, there are more riches to find within the way that we live, I suppose, maybe life experiences. But I'm thinking going back to being in my 30s, and I can remember when we were going through IVF, and I was in a Facebook group, and there were two of us who, out of, I don't know, about 15 of us in this group, and there was only two of us that didn't go on to be parents. And each time one of them became pregnant, not all necessarily IVF, different situations, life situations, it was just like another kind of like, I'm alone. God, there's two of us left. And then the other, the woman that was left, disappeared. Everybody else had gone as well. And it was just like me. I was the one left, and I just didn't know where to go. It's like that part, I think, for anyone that's been through any form of treatment, or you've been looking for, and you go into places. I know there were forums attached to the clinics that I was having treatment for, and I would think it would be different for everyone's route into childlessness, into this space. You may go out and look for support, but it sometimes is crossed over with people who are trying to conceive. And there's an area of the board I remember going to, which was where people had not been successful, hovering over it, thinking, if I click in it, it's true. But you go through and start to read people's signatures obsessively as to how often they'd all these emojis, and I could never really work them out, to be fair. But there obviously were acronyms and things like that, and emojis and rainbow icons and things like that, and you try and work it all out. But it was that sense, I think, with systems, perhaps with society, and feeling absolutely devastated at the time. There was a genuine grief around loss of friendship, because it felt like they wouldn't probably come back until much later. There was only one friend who I've spoken, I think, on the podcast about before, who stayed in touch with me. And even then we had a period of separation after her second child, her second daughter, and it was hard to work through it. But we had some threads, some very fine threads. There's a question actually that we had in on social media. I'll come back to it later, but it was that it's a genuine grief, I think, when you lose a friendship. For me, it still can feel, I think, like that, but definitely then at the time. And I think as I've gone through childlessness and later in life and lost friendships, I'm aware of that person, that person still inside me who was so devastated then by the fact that I was the last one who hadn't had children, because you attach yourself to a tribe of people who were trying to conceive, and they become very much people who have shared the nitty gritty. They know the pain of the injection, or they know what it's like for if their employer treats them badly, or whatever. You've gone through a tribal thing together, I think. So yeah, I think there's a real grief there.
Yeah. Another friend who was a father. His initial reaction was hostility. He said, what are you going on about? We're all dealt cards that we don't like. We just have to put up with it. And you should just get on with it. Kevin is a lovely guy, and we've been friends for a long time. But we carried on talking about it. And after about the fifth session with several bottles of red wine involved, he suddenly said, I get it. I know what you're going on about. And it was almost like a sort of eureka moment. There was a click. He'd been working at it because he cares, and we'd worked through it together. And he said, I'm just lucky to have been a parent and to have 3 children, but it might not have happened just if something had been different physically or something. So it was a good outcome from initial misunderstanding to trying to understand each other's position. So that was positive.
Yeah, that working at it, isn't it? It takes both sides to work at it, I think, and sometimes it takes a bit more effort on the person who hasn't experienced that to somehow meet. I always say meet in the middle, but I feel like we're kind of like we've given enough of ourselves away at the moment, and we need you to kind of cross the middle line and do a bit more if you can, if such a thing exists.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good example, isn't it? Because I'm kind of sitting with the way I kind of handled my loss of friendship, and I don't think I would have had 6 bottles of wine in me to sit and try and understand. I don't.
Not at the same time.
Well, no, quite. But it's also the sitting with: have I got it in me to kind of be that patient? Do you know what I mean? It sounded as though you had lots of patience on both sides. Obviously, the alcohol would have helped. But for me, I just remember feeling very hurt and very alone as I watched people sort of slide out of my life, whether I wanted them to or not. Sometimes it was on me. I was in a very painful place. So, I was kind of holding people off. But there was an awful lot of people that just sort of slid out of my friendship.
Yeah.
And there wasn't really that capacity or that space for me to go, oh, hang on a minute, can we get to grips with this? Can we talk about it? So I think that's a real gift that you and your friend were able to find that space to have that conversation.
Yeah, the conditions were right, and we had a lot of time, and it was just us 2. And there were no children there, and because he's divorced, and the children were not around, so there were conditions that made it work like that. Yeah,
that leads quite nicely into a question that I had on email from someone who is a parent, who said, "How do I, as a parent, meet in the middle?" They're friends with somebody, not actually with me. I do know them, but they have someone in their family and in their friendship circle who, for various reasons, neither of them have children and identify as childless, not by choice. And I think that's an interesting thing. It's the conditions, isn't it? I think that's a really, really important thing that perhaps we don't pay enough attention to, I think maybe in ourselves, but also perhaps how we're asking other people to show up and talk to us as well. You mentioned then their children were around, you had the time. That really matters, doesn't it? I think if we're going to repair all of this, how, it's putting the phone away and literally, is this a Zoom chat? Is this an in-person chat? Is it down the pub? Is it in our home? Whose home? All those things, they really matter, don't they, in setting that scene up for success?
Yeah. And there are instances where the opposite is the case. It's, the other extreme would be at the school gates where parents are meeting their kids or collecting their kids. That's the sort of worst situation to reach that kind of understanding, and all sorts of situations between those 2 extremes. But Kevin and I were just, quite good at talking and sort of quite good at friendship. So it was a strong friendship. So I think that's why it was possible as well. And there are lots and lots of instances where that hasn't happened. And as I like the way Sarah uses the word slide or slid, things just slide away. There's nothing very dramatic about it. It's just suddenly not there very much anymore. And that the accumulation of those, that is rather sad, but not very sad.
Yeah.
But within the time we've got, there's be interesting to. I'd quite like to later on to talk about that the loss of friendship or the lessening of friendship is itself part of a larger picture, that something else is going on. Perhaps it makes it not quite so bleak.
Let's go there. Let's talk about that. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting one, I think, to talk about.
Is it too soon?
No, I think it's important. I'm kind of wanting to go down that route as well, because I think that the questions that we've had in is like the other one is how can we be friends with parents? And again, this how can a parent meet in the middle with us? And that actually is about, to me, that's a positive thing to get two questions in, I think, that are quite powerful to actually go and explore. And they also, I think, have their roots in a more positive way, and perhaps a restorative conversation as much as anything else, or restorative actions. So I don't think at all it's too soon to be positive. I think we've all experienced, I think, that loss of friendship and that grief over it. But where do we start from here, and how do we find those connections? What do we do next? Yeah.
Just going back to the book, there's another section early on in the book where it's called The Dinner Party, which is based on absolute fact. It was with my partner's son and his family. They came to dinner, and the whole of the dinner party was focused on their three kids. I ended up, after they'd gone, collapsing on the kitchen floor in a sobbing wreck. In the meantime, within the year, the mother had read my book, and we met again in the cafe. And she'd been working on trying to understand what on earth I'd written about. And she'd got through, and she hadn't, things about me she didn't know, and now she gets it. So that was another, you're talking about conditions, Berenice. Well, I suppose her condition was just reading a book quietly all by herself with no one else around, reading my book. And so that the conditions were right for a bit of meditation on it. So that's another technique. Maybe.
Thank you for sharing that. I wondered about, I know that when I first started to design the book, that chapter just stood out to me so much. I kept going back to it. There was so much in it that just resonated in so many ways. And I wondered what the outcome would be when people had read that, the people at dinner party. I'm so glad you shared that. That's really interesting, isn't it? That she went that way.
She was the character in it.
Oh.
Do you think this... Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Sarah, you go ahead.
I was just going to ask, actually, because I got the sense, correct me if I'm wrong, Robert, but it felt like your book was kind of a way for you to process your grief. Do you feel that us, the collective community, do you feel we have to do some grief work before we're in a place to be able to meet in the middle? Where do you see this happening in our journey, if that makes sense? Do you have any sense of that?
Well, my instinctive reaction to your great question, Sarah, is 100% yes. There are no shortcuts. And it kind of ties in with what I was wanting to sort of say now about the importance of grief, and grief is transformative, and certainly has been for me. And I couldn't have got to where I am, which is seeing myself as a writer now rather than a journeyman hack journalist or teacher. So it's completely transformed me, but I couldn't have done it without facing up to that kitchen floor moment and the grief and other ones. And it's still there. And I made a note about my partner Sue does voluntary teaching in the primary school down the road on Friday mornings, and she's got her own little stories for 5 and 6 year olds, and talking about her own life as a 5 and 6 year old. Every week she reads out a story, and the kids love it, and they give her little presents at the end, and she's called Story Sue. We put these sometimes we put them on the fridge door with a magnet, and there's just little pictures there. And the day before yesterday, I stood in front of it. I got the milk out of the fridge and saw these pictures. My daughter could have done those pictures. It never goes away. It never goes away. And I was in tears. But it was as if, because I've gone through the grief, they were like, if it makes sense, good tears. They were sort of warm and not full of pain. They were pain. I don't know. It's so difficult to describe. But yeah, so it's still there. But going back to the friendship thing, the loss of friendship, I would argue, could also be because you yourself have changed and are changing at a really, really deep level. This is just speaking for myself. And the writing the book, yes, it was a way of me dealing with it, Sarah, catharsis. But even more so, the play came first, but has been doing nothing for 2 years. But it's now. And that is, I don't think I could have written that without feeling the pain of unwanted childlessness. I couldn't have done it. So I don't think there is an easy way of getting to that point. I don't know what you three think.
Yeah, I'd agree. I like the way Sarah put it as grief work. I've been guilty of putting it in a bit more of a blunt way, but I'm thinking about two friendships that I've got right now, and these people I don't want to say congratulate me, but they are very respectful of what I get up to. They're very respectful of what the podcast does, and I know because they've told me that I've educated them in something they didn't even know existed. And I think it marries quite well in a different way of what you were saying, Robert, where I think that the crux of this is the fact that I've been able to be vocal. And one particular friend has thanked me for it because he goes, I never, ever, ever considered or thought about this sort of stuff. And we've had some really deep conversations and been able to really roar about what it's like to be childless. And he's been really receptive. He's got 3 kids, our grandparents. But when you're able to sit with someone and say, imagine you didn't have any of that, imagine it. And they are looking after some elderly parents as well with other siblings. And so I say to them, imagine not having anyone to rely on. And it created a really great, rich, deep discussion. And so the way you put it, Sarah, about the grief work, to me, it's being able to speak about it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it has its basis in doing grief work. And I think that is, if I want our community to walk away from this episode with one thing, it is if you don't talk about it, nothing will change. But yes, I do recognise that there's a complex journey to go through to get to that point. But yeah, don't be afraid of it.
Yeah.
Like you said, Robert, there's a catharsis in there.
Absolutely. And I've been sending the manuscript of my play around to people for their feedback, which I'm getting. Somebody I sent it to read it. She's a mother, and she wrote back and said, "Blimey, thank you. I had no idea that nobody ever speaks about this of what childless people are feeling and not expressing." And she said, "I had no idea. Open, intelligent person, sensitive and compassionate, but the blindness to this is extraordinary and the last unrecognised minority, the childless people." But going back to the idea of transformation, if I may, that the grief is a process that enables other things about one's personality to come out. With me, it's been creativity with writing. I'm writing poetry. I'm writing all sorts of things which are being received okay. And of course, by acknowledging the grief, you make yourself vulnerable. And this attracts a different kind of person within the childless. I mean, it's just been amazing. People within the childless community. I've never come across a group of people of the same mind ever in my life before. So supportive, so understanding. So you go into a room where there are childless people and they just get it immediately. It's just absolutely wonderful. And just acceptance and vulnerability is actually quite interesting. It makes life interesting. Other people who are open, you just have better conversations and things get thrown up which don't in other forms of life or in parenthood. I don't know if anybody feels that.
If the topic in this episode chimes with you, you can get in touch with us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn and Blue Sky. We appreciate your feedback. Childless Not by Choice listeners can carry on the conversation with us in our safe space at the Full Stop online community. For more details on how to join and to claim a free month's trial on us, please visit www.thefullstoppod.com. We extend a huge thanks to the current members of our amazing online community, and it's because of them that we can keep the lights on for the podcast and look forward to giving back to the childless community as we grow. I think there's a comfort in, I think, those safe spaces. I'm never really sure that childlessness is enough glue sometimes to hold all friendships together, but I think that those friendships can be very much deeper because you haven't got to navigate those potholes, I think, along the way. And there's a safety, I think, in that too. And I think you can build up confidence. I think when we lose friendships, our confidences can be knocked, how we feel. We can feel quite vulnerable. Then I think if we were in a space where we've got people together and we are having conversations that are without those trip ups, then I think we can get our confidence back. We can feel a bit safer. We can perhaps test some things out and we can turn up with more authenticity than we had before. But that in itself, I think, can be quite terrifying. I don't know if that's a commonality with just a me thing, but I find that because I've been so used to kind of going in and doing that kind of smile and wave thing in situations where there's people doing lots of stuff. Certainly in my other life, when I'm going along to networking groups and I'm going to conferences, I'm going to different things, I'm going to offices where there's going to be all sorts of people there doing different things. And predominantly it's parent dominated. To go then into somewhere where it's childless people, in Lisa Casane's network Flow, which I'm part of, it's childlessness isn't the thing she set it up for. It just happens to be that everybody in that space is non-parenting, and it's kind of, oh, okay, I don't have to think about that part anymore. And it's kind of hard to kind of switch that bit off and go, okay, I don't need to be on the defensive, not defensive, but to put those boundaries and those barriers in place. I think it's so important to have boundaries. I have boundaries all the time, but I think it's letting go of something, getting go of a kind of a part of us that sort of is always there going, oh God, there's going to be a difficult conversation. Someone's going to tell me about their grandchild or a solution to having children. I don't want it. I've learnt that behaviour for so long that to switch it off and go, okay, I'm safe here, is really, really hard. I think, I find that quite overwhelming sometimes, but there is such a solidarity, I think, in those situations where we're all together and quite a powerfulness. And there's also quite a lot, I think, comes from that. As you said, like creativity, we can then start to explore the things perhaps we put on hold because we didn't feel like we could do it before, because perhaps we were taking up our energy in a different way.
Yeah. I really resonate with that. I think that's such an important point. When we're part, you're not going to chime with everyone in the childless community. That's not possible. Speaking from experience, part of my healing was finding people in the childless community because I felt like such a spare part in normal bunny ears, you know what I mean, out in the real world. I felt like such a spare part, and having those people slide away and you're like, hang on a minute, where you gone? It really does knock your confidence, because it's not like a huge blow up where you've had a say. They've just disappeared. So you can't give that viewpoint. You can't say, hang on a minute, let's talk about it. But I also like the transformative element that you mentioned there, Robert. I know from my own experience that I'm a completely different person because of my childlessness. I was a very, very different person. I turned up very differently. I didn't have an awful lot of confidence, for starters. And then my childlessness completely, almost, what would I say, completely burnt everything away. And I was a very vulnerable, raw nerve of a person. And then because of the community and because of the work, the grief work, I'm now a very different person. And I really like that transformative, because I think when you're in it and you're seeing your friends slide away, you think, hang on a minute, this is crap. On top of the grief, I've now got to deal with this grief. But actually, it's almost like starting almost like at ground zero again, isn't it? You have to start over.
I totally agree with that. Yes, there is the support and friendship of other people within the childless community, but I think it's also something very, very deep inside the individual that gets transformed. And I can only speak for myself, but there are parts of me that have been there, buried for 40, 50 years, that have come out because of this experience. The creativity and the writing. And to go and publish this very unusual book with Berenice, and people couldn't believe I'd done it, because I've been quite shy and reticent through much of my life, my adult life. And I've always believed that extreme situations, e.g. childlessness, require extreme solutions. Yeah. So you just go and do something, and some door will open, and you sort out what it is later. I'm absolutely passionate believer in that little statement. And writing the book fell into that, and now the play. So you just say, sod it, I'm going to do it. And it's so liberating, and I can't, it's a feeling of, I can't not do it.
Yeah.
You're driven.
Completely. I think that was it is. I mean, I guess the full stop is probably a good example of that. So many things I think that have come out of people being devastated by something and that need to do something about it. We think of Jodie's work, of Stella Duffy standing up at Storyhouse and her conversations that she's been having as well. And I think there's so much that's motivated. The phrase I've written down here that I stand by is more, not less, for my experiences. But like you, I'm still working, grief is still present. Yeah. I had a dreadful weekend last weekend because it was just right there. Doesn't mean I'm better or over it. It's just that it came up. Lots of stuff came up because it was a tough anniversary. I was, sideswiped by how dreadful I felt, but I knew what it was. And like you said, Michael, it's not being scared of it. And it is terrifying. And I think, oh my God, I'm going to go back to where I was. In this instance, 8 years ago was a significant thing for me. 8 years ago, I'm going to go back to 8 years. Hang on a minute. Now, I've done 8 years of something. I might not know it, and I might not have written it down and gone, I did this, and it's not a list, but in there, that 8 years still exists, and all these things I've done have happened. And I'm not the person I was then. It's that transformative effect that means that I do still count myself as being more, not less. I'm not going back to 8 years ago when I thought I'm just, I'm less of everything. Everything's less. And it's finding a way of coping with that. But it is that grief work. I think it's so very important, however that feels and however that looks to somebody and however you want to address that. I think that the grief, or I don't like the word acceptance, but acknowledging that it's grief, acknowledging there is a loss. And just to quote Jodie again, that living a life unexpected, it very much is that, and aware and conscious of that. It's a big and powerful transformation, I think, for anybody to go through. Yeah. But there's positives, I think, that come from it, I think, as well, that more, not less, and the authenticity as well that comes into that. There was something else you'd said, Sarah, and I've scribbled it down and I can't read my writing. I think in response to that, yes, I think that loss, I think it's huge. I think sometimes it just doesn't really, we don't talk perhaps enough about how impactful that grief is. And also I think as well that friendships, how much they mean, that idea we've talked about before on the podcast of the found family, that friendships can feel like family. I wonder if that resonates with the person who's put that comment in the chat, that found family and friendship is a more powerful term when we identify as single, childless people.
Yeah, and sometimes we forget perhaps to talk about the special situation of single people.
Yeah.
If you have a partner, you're married, or you're living with somebody, the shape of your life is probably pretty different to somebody who is living by themselves. And if they're childless as well, this emerged at one of the sessions, I think Jodie's session in Chester, about the situation for single people being, it's just a double whammy.
It is, it is.
I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because with that loss, I mean, that found family, I think the childless community has given me a found family. So that feeling of loss, I think, is even more if you lose some of that found family. I find myself investing more in my friends that I've had since my childlessness, perhaps because of that authenticity. But I don't underestimate how lonely it must be when you go home and it's kind of, you're doing it on your own. It must be incredible.
Yeah. If you had a bad day, just something, for me, it feels like that if there's a small thing that kind of happens to me, I can come home and my husband might not get it, but at least I've gone bleh to somebody and he might get it. We might have a filthy argument about it, but I've gone and I've exported the words out of here into the air. And even if it didn't work, then I've got someone to have a hug with, to go home and have that inside me, and to say that even if that was to an open space or to a pet or to, it's not the same. There is no parallel to that. And I've been single in my life, but it predates childlessness. And I just want to acknowledge to that person that I don't understand that but I want to say that I've listened and I've heard you. And I wish that I could offer more words, and I can't. But I want to say I've listened and heard you. And I know that, and I want to just say to that person that you are very important to me. Very, very, very important to me. But I know it's not the same.
Very important to all of us.
Yeah, very much so.
He's back.
Michael
Sorry,
disappeared.
it kicked me out again.
Doing a spot of gardening.
No.
He's doing something with the header. He forgot something.
What did I miss?
We responded to the comment in the chat. So I don't know if you would like to give a response to that too. We wanted just to acknowledge the importance of those words and that observation.
Yeah, I don't want to say too much because that's not my experience. But I'm very grateful for comments like that because again, it helps me understand things better. And in some ways, I think knowing the person who put that in the chat, it helps me know where to put my friendship energy. I don't know if that makes sense, but friends are special people, and I think and I adore my friendships. And knowing if people are like, again, we talked about the importance of communication. Yeah, helps me put my friendship energy in where it needs to go. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Mm.
I think that's so important as well, that energy of friendship. And I think along the way, I'm just going to go back to what we'd said before about we're not going to chime with everybody. Sarah, as you said, it's not everything's going to work for you. I'm very conscious that the full stop isn't everyone's cup of tea. I'm not everyone's cup of tea. That's okay by me because it doesn't always work like that. We will find people within the childless community and go, okay, that is going to be my person. That person isn't going to be my person. I'm not always going to do a book for everybody in the childless community because people might not actually like what I do. That's okay. But actually, other people will. And it's okay to kind of just make those choices, but also to have those boundaries and to feel safe, I think is important within the childless community. I very much feel safe within the environment with Michael and Sarah. I don't know that I could do a podcast with anybody else. I've been asked, I wouldn't do that because this is where I am. And that's our friendship. If one of us left, it might not be the same again. So it's kind of working out. I strongly feel that it's important to focus that energy where you feel like it's best for you. Not everyone's going to be your thing, but I think it's one positive to that isn't it great that we've got more than one thing to choose from? We are not the only podcast. Robert, I think you're unique in what you have done, but there are other podcasts available.
Something's just this moment occurred to me that I haven't really thought about before, is that a lot of my friends are childless, but they're not within the childless community. And so in and around here in East London, I can go and watch football with other guys who are childless, married. There's thousands and thousands of these guys, Michael, that we've talked about, who haven't articulated their unwanted childlessness, are sort of half living it, half aware of it. And I'm friends with a lot of these kind of people, so they're not a part of childless groups, Facebook groups, but their experience is very similar. It's just very much under the surface. And I value their friendships because they get it in a very quiet, unstated way. And there ain't no kids around. You're able to communicate and just have this understanding that we're actually in the same situation. We just don't talk about it very much. And you don't always have to articulate everything. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I've got people in my life who just happen to not have kids. We've never talked why. I guess actually my brother probably falls into that too. It just is. But yeah, two close friends of mine, we just don't. If they know that I don't, I'm more vocal about it because I wanted to articulate that, but they don't feel that they have to. And I don't know why they aren't parents. We just don't talk about it. It's not a necessary thing because there's too many other things going on, and that's okay. They know what I do and they've gone, oh yeah, full stop, brilliant, lovely. Or more likely, they're likely to talk more about the design stuff I do than the full stop because that's more or less how they know me. That's okay. We can diversify in more ways. It's not like, it's not a word that has to come up all the time. The child thing, yeah.
But there is this intuitive communication.
Yeah, it's like a
inarticulate. It's still there. It's very strong.
Of like a radar thing, and you're like, okay, I know. I've migrated to you for a reason, but I don't know why. But I know that situation won't change. But again, I don't know why that is. It just is. It's, again, maybe that sort of, that moving in groups. Maybe we identify somehow. I know sometimes we can get that wrong. I know that's come up in conversations where I've certainly done it, where, and in fact, very recently, somebody was recommended to me for mental health support because they'd miscarried and they actually now are pregnant. And I had to say, I can't, because there is that possibility that they will become pregnant. And then that puts me in a vulnerable situation. And now, of course, I've been dropped like hot coals, because it's just like, she's the childless pariah. And I think, that's talking out those boundaries again, and just being careful not to attach to people, or to identify too much, because I think situations can change that. I've seen that vulnerability pop up a few times in places where people have been hurt because life's changed again. It's quite vulnerable making sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's tricky. Again, going back to the point Robert made about transformation, there are friends that have slid out of my life, but actually I don't think we'd be compatible now. So I think that transformation changes us, and so we turn up differently, and so we're attracted, as you said, Robert, to different people. What I'm finding is I think I'm kind of coming out the other side a little bit. I'll never be child-free. I will always be childless, and there will always be those moments. I really resonate with what you were saying, Robert, about the pictures on the fridge. I had a little boy wave at me the other day, and I found myself waving back, and I was like, "Ooh, ouch," because it actually still hurts. But it's not the complete tailspin it used to be. It's like, oh, yeah, that hurt, but I've clocked it, but at least I can acknowledge children now. But what I've found is actually some of my friends, and I am very discerning, I will caveat this, some of my friends who are parents, not all parents are the same. Some of them, they come out with me, they don't want to talk about their children. I've got a really dear friend who's got a child who's SEN, so special educational needs. So her projecting forward, she's not going to have grandchildren and things like that. And I find that actually the more my grief has kind of not shrunk but subsided, the more able I am to accept people into my life as friends and put energy into those friendships, even though they're parents or, slightly alternative lifestyles, if you like. And I think that's perhaps what we don't see when we're in the midst of it. We don't understand where we're going and where we're going to find these people. But they will always be around because we shift. And I think growing that confidence in the community and your own, and that transformation, means that you will attract different people in. It's tough, but it will happen. I don't know if any of you have found that too.
I get what you say about coming out the other side. Before you were on, I was talking a little bit to Michael about that earlier on this morning, that I thought, I don't know whether it's my journalism background, but I'm very aware of wanting to talk about the issue, spread the message, however you want to describe it, within the 100% pro-natalist world. That if you've coped with the grief, or you're coping successfully with the grief and coming out the other side a little bit, and also because I'm a bit pig-headed, I like a challenge, and I want to talk to people who it is a surprise to have people articulating about childlessness. And I just wanted to say that's kind of where I am now. So, like you, Sarah, I'm happy to, and I do, make new friendships with people who are parents, and often find it okay, and sometimes not. But just take it as it comes.
Yeah, I think that's important too. And I think that's the only way sometimes that we're ever going to spread the word that this thing exists, is by actually having that conversation. I know that we have parents that listen to the Full Stop and support what we do, because I think for me, again, Sarah, you mentioned this too, bashing parents is not right. I think either you end up sort of falling into a lot of issues, I think, there, because I don't know that my experience of my friends who are parents is that it's, for us, it's acknowledging the mutual kind of shitness of life. Sometimes, in fact, my best friend is a parent, and similar situation. She certainly won't be a grandmother with one of her children. The other, I don't know. That's entirely their choice completely. But again, it's been hard for her. She's been through a hell of a lot with her children, and I've been through a lot. They all know that I don't have children when we talk about that, but we also talk about the other stuff too, and acknowledging that it's different types of crap that actually helps a lot, because I see things from her point of view, that things are a struggle. And I certainly see it with someone who's a fairly young child, and she thought it was the right thing to do, but is now kind of freaking out about the world situation, rightly so, and the planet. And I feel so desperately kind of like, that's just awful. Again, we talk about the awfulness that we share. And I kind of want to go back to that question as well about the parent who said, what can they do to meet in the middle? And I think it is just acknowledging that it is difficult on all sides, and that it might be an invisible grief. It might not be something that we talk about all the time, but it's still always going to be present. It doesn't go away. Life doesn't change dramatically. We're not going to get a fix to it. There won't be a solution to it. And I think acknowledging that, I think, is probably the most important thing to do. And to listen, the art of listening, I think, is really important, and not fixing are the things that I think matter. But I think that goes on all sides. In every conversation in life, it's not suddenly leaping to fix it, whether that's childlessness or anything else, but to listen.
Yeah, I'd say I'd add to that and just say your curiosity. Be you a parent, being curious about that, the life that we would lead, and I think we definitely should reciprocate and try to understand them as well. So I know that Vicky and I have got quite a number of people in our life that we can be very curious with, different situations that they have with their children, and at the same time they're reciprocal, wanting to know what it's like for us, what it's like to and it might sound a bit flippant, but what it's like for us to not have the problems that they have. And it's not competition. It's more about, okay, well, what it starts the conversation where they go, what is it in your life? What is the big issues in your life? You've heard ours. What are yours? And I think, that curiosity is key.
Yeah, it's a really good point.
I liked your comment, Robert, when you said it might not be right, that friendship might not be right. I think that's so important as well, is to try it out and see. But I think walking away and going, actually, this isn't right for me right now, that's really hard to do that with any friendship, I think. But, not right, just sometimes we can slide away. We have permission to slide away ourselves. It doesn't have to be that somebody else is in charge and you will be my friend, because they've always been friends or whatever. We're allowed to slide away too, and to do so gracefully if we need to. It's okay to do that. Sometimes it isn't the right fit. So
Robert, you've talked a lot about I'm curious. What's going on with this play? Tell us.
I wish I knew. Well, so this links in with thank you for asking, Michael. I really appreciate your curiosity. So going back to when I worked with Berenice, collaboration on the book, the version of the play was already there, but it wasn't making any grounds or wasn't getting anywhere. So the book took over, and that's been happening for 2 or 3 years. And then last autumn, there was a theatre group down here in the East End of London who were fundraising because they were strapped for cash and they were in danger of folding, and had a little cafe. So Sue and I went down there for lunch, and we had a very nice lunch in the cafe. And the next table was this guy who looked as if he might be the boss. And so I wandered over to him and said, "We'll make a little donation to the theatre and hope you can keep going." And we got talking, and I said, "Oh, well, I've got a play." And he said, "Oh, I love reading new plays. Send it to me." So I went back home and sent it to him by email. And he said, I really like this. It's empty play about childlessness. And we discussed it for about an hour, and he said it had 5 characters in it at that point. And he said for budgetary reasons, they couldn't even think of putting it on because they couldn't afford to pay 5 actors, plus a director, plus a lighting technician, etc., etc. So he says, "Is there any chance you can turn it into a 2-hander for 2 actors?" And I said, "Well, to get it on, I'll try." So I spent the whole of December turning it from a 5-part play into a 2-part play. Finished it, delivered it, and he said he liked it. And then, sadly, the theatre group, which is called Apple Cart Arts, you may have heard of it, didn't raise their money by the end of the year, and it's folded and it doesn't exist anymore. So he's gone back to the RSC and maybe coming back to the East End in June. But I wasn't going to hang around, so I spent January and February sending my play to the fringe theatres in London, and I there are about 35, would you believe, which I discovered. So I've been sending it off to them, and there's a theatre called The Space down in the Isle of Dogs, and I was exploring all these possibilities. The play became a two-hander, and one of the things I did was to post a message on Aging Without Children website, saying I'm looking for a director and 2 actors to get involved with my play. And I got recommendations, and I got 2 people, to cut a long story short, 2 women, both from the Northeast, who have both directed and both acted, and they're both on board now. We have what's called a rehearsed reading in May, and that's going to take place. And so there'll be a director and 2 actors, and myself in this little studio room, which I booked. So that's great. Can't wait for that. And I'm actually working on another rewrite at the moment. So I've sent the play out to a number of people, and I've got their feedback. So I'm responding or not responding to various bits of feedback. I'm choosing which bits to change and which bits are not. So and the guy at Applecart Arts did me a real favor, because by saying, could you turn it into a two-hander, it improved it and made it tighter and more powerful in the message. So he did me a favor. And so I'm learning. I come from the world of journalism, and I've never really written a play before. So it's a steep learning curve about how you go around with plays. And even the best of plays, Beckett and Pinter have probably rewritten their plays about 20 times. So it's part of the process. And when actors get hold of it, they start putting in good things, and you incorporate those. So it's lovely and complex. So just one more thing. The other day, there was some of you may have heard of the Old Red Lion Theatre in Islington, which is one of many pub theatres, which is a great institution. So they had a thing called Monday Monologues, and they invited me. I sent a monologue in, the one of the guy on the tube train from the book, Berenice. You remember that one? So I added to that a bit, made it a bit longer. It was 8 minutes long. Sent it in. He invited me to join 4 other writers a couple of weeks ago to read that out, to perform that in the theatre, which I did, and it went down fine. So the words are beginning to get out there. And, there was a Q&A afterwards, and these people in the audience, mostly young people, other writers and their friends, somebody said, God, I'd never even thought about that before. So the same dynamic coming out of it. So it's for me, I won't go on about it, but it's just so exciting for me. The most exciting thing I've done as a writer is this. We'll see what happens.
I'm so excited about this as well. It's so inspirational, Robert, whenever we catch up with you, whenever I've spoken to you in person or around, and there's always something going on. And I love the way that you're getting out this story of childlessness, and particularly childless men, in a different way, in stage environment, in books. Books, there's a fair few books, but again, the uniqueness of a childless man, I think, is so inspirational. It's what caught me. But again, just on a play as well, and in the different formats that a play can be produced as well. And monologues, of course, is a wonderful thing. You have a wonderful speaking voice. And again, an author reading a work is a very privileged thing to witness. I think it's very different to having an actor or somebody else reading it out. To hear you read your words, I think, is incredibly powerful. So
again, a collaboration. I'm just so excited to be working with these 2 women. Both of them have worked with Jodie on Gateway Women as well, in some shape or form. I'm not quite sure what until I meet them. So, they are actors and directors, and they get it.
And the power of friendship and the power of collaboration. Yeah. I mean, where all these things lead is what comes out with all of this. You've met other people, and you've talked to this director, and how it's all galvanized from there. It's having the conversations and taking it from there, I think, is an incredibly powerful thing. Congratulations, Robert. I can't wait to see more.
Well, guys, nothing's happened yet, but we'll see.
Oh, I'm sure it will.
Being crossed by you.
Yeah.
But thanks for your interest. It's lovely.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed catching up with Robert as much as we did. And if you want to find out more about the Full Stop, or want us to take a deeper dive into a topic, then head over to www.thefullstoppod.com, where you can also sign up for our email newsletter, check out the show notes, resources, and join our online community to carry on the conversation, or you may even find some new friendships in there. And as always, it's important for us to let you know you are not alone. We're off.
It's the bit where we all go
I
quiet.
always go quiet.
You'd think after how many episodes? 700 billion and 52. We'd know what we were doing.